Ngozi Chisholm stood at the stove in her modest two-bedroom flat in Diobu, Port Harcourt, humming as she stirred the pot of ogbono soup. Her two children, Ife and Chuka, chased each other around the living room with the boundless energy only children seem to possess. The radio played softly in the background, mixing with laughter and the clatter of evening preparation. Outside, the night was calm, save for the occasional honk of Kiki Napeps and distant murmurs of generators coming to life. Life, though hard, was full of rhythm. Then, without warning, it happened. A thunderous explosion ripped through the air. The walls trembled and the lights blinked out. Screams tore through the night. Ngozi dropped the spoon and ran toward her children, heart pounding. Before she could reach them, the entire front wall of her flat gave way, fire licking up the curtains. It was chaos, blinding heat, suffocating smoke, and the unmistakable horror of everything collapsing. In that one moment, the life she knew disintegrated into ash and silence. When Ngozi opened her eyes, everything was white. A sterile ceiling, fluorescent lights, and the scent of antiseptic filled her senses. Pain surged through her side and she winced. She was in a hospital bed. Disoriented, she tried to sit up, only for a nurse to gently push her back down. "Easy, madam. You were lucky to survive." But her thoughts raced past survival. Her children, her home, her heart. "Where are my children?" she croaked. The nurse's face changed, and without speaking, she placed her hand gently on Ngozi's. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. Tears flooded Ngozi's eyes as the truth struck. They were gone. Everything gone in one night. Her body trembled, but inside she felt empty. Her spirit had died in that fire, even if her body lived on. Ngozi remained in the hospital for 5 days. Not because her injuries were severe, but because she had nowhere else to go. With every hour that passed, the walls closed in tighter, and her breathing grew more labored. Not from her healing ribs, but from grief. Her relatives came, her younger cousin Chinyu, her auntie from ABA. But they offered little comfort. Pity dripped from their eyes like slow poison. She hated it. She hated the world. She often stared out the window, watching people walk past the hospital gates, free and full of purpose. At night she refused to sleep. Instead, she whispered names into the darkness. Ife, Chuka. Over and over again like a chant. There was no response. The silence mocked her. On the 5th night, she asked the nurse for a paper and pen. Her hands trembled as she wrote a simple note. Then, she folded it neatly and placed it beneath her pillow. She had made up her mind. Just before dawn, Ngozi slipped out of her hospital bed and walked barefoot toward the stairwell. The halls were quiet, and the city was still asleep. She moved slowly, deliberately. But just as she reached the fire exit, a voice called out, "Madam Ngozi." He turned, startled. A man stood at the end of the hallway, medium height, dressed simply in a kaftan and sandals, with a calm but intense gaze. She didn't recognize him. He held something in his hands, a folded wrapper and a Bible. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. "My name doesn't matter," he said. "But I was told to find you. God sent me." Her breath caught. It was absurd. Or was it? The man walked slowly toward her and handed her the wrapper. Inside was a photograph of her and her children, one she'd thought was lost in the fire. "He sees you," the man whispered, pointing upward. Then he turned and walked away. Back in her hospital bed, Ngozi clutched the photo as if it were life itself. The man had vanished before she could ask him anything more. None of the nurses had seen him enter or leave. The hallway CCTV. It hadn't worked in weeks. It was as though he had appeared just for her. As the morning light streamed through the window, she opened the Bible he'd left behind. A page was bookmarked with a torn piece of hospital paper. Isaiah 61 verse 3. "To appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning." The verse struck her like thunder. She read it over and over until her tears stained the page. Maybe she wasn't meant to die. Maybe her life still held purpose, even if she couldn't see it yet. That morning, for the first time since the fire, Ngozi prayed. Not loudly, not eloquently, just a broken whisper. God, if this is you, show me what to do next. Outside, the city stirred to life. But inside, a woman on the edge had taken one small step back toward the light. 2 days after the mysterious encounter, Ngozi was discharged from the hospital. Chinyu came to pick her up in a borrowed taxi. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of things neither dared say. As they drove through Port Harcourt, Ngozi saw remnants of the explosion. Charred walls, cracked buildings, and a burnt tree standing alone like a witness that refused to forget. Chinyu led her to a small one-room apartment she had prepared in her compound in Rumuokoro. It was barely enough space to breathe, but it had a mattress, a lantern, and clean clothes. As Ngozi stepped inside, her knees gave way. She dropped to the ground, overwhelmed. It wasn't just the trauma or the loss. It was starting over, alone, with nothing. She buried her face in her palms and wept, while Chinyu stood by the door, helpless. Days turned into weeks. Ngozi barely spoke. She didn't cook, didn't bathe, and barely ate. Chinyu tried everything, comfort, anger, distraction, but nothing worked. Then one night, Chinyu left a small portable radio on the floor and turned it to a gospel station before going to bed. As the worship music filled the dark room, something inside Ngozi stirred. It was the song, "Even in the fire, you are with me." The words echoed through her, challenging the silence she had wrapped herself in. She turned to face the radio, listening. For the first time in weeks, she whispered, "Are you?" She didn't expect a response, but the air felt lighter. Something had shifted. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. Ngozi opened it slowly. A middle-aged woman in an old church wrapper stood there, holding a steaming bowl of yam porridge. "My name is Mummy Titi," she said gently. "I heard about you from Chinyu. I live 2 compounds away. I just wanted to say, understand. I lost my husband and 2 daughters in a fire too. That was 10 years ago." Ngozi's eyes widened. The woman reached for her hand. "I survived. You can too. Don't lock yourself in. Come to church with me on Sunday. You don't even have to pray. Just sit. That's enough for now." Ngozi didn't answer. But she didn't close the door either. Sunday came. Ngozi stood in front of the mirror, wearing a dress Chinyu had ironed. Her reflection looked foreign, thin, tired, but somehow still standing. At church, the service had already started. People were singing. Mummy Titi led her to a seat at the back. Ngozi didn't sing. She didn't raise her hands. But when the pastor spoke about God's purpose through pain, her tears flowed silently. After service, a few women greeted her. One young woman hugged her gently, whispering, "We're glad you're here." That night, Ngozi didn't cry herself to sleep. For the first time in a long time, she slept deeply. The next few days brought a slow but steady change. Ngozi started helping Chinyu in the kitchen. She even stepped outside to sweep the compound one morning. Mummy Titi visited often, bringing small Bible verses written on colorful paper. One evening, Ngozi sat outside watching the sunset. A soft breeze brushed her face, and she felt something in the air. A presence, a calm. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for sending that man. Whoever he was." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves. And in her heart, she felt the message again. A week later, Chinyu returned from the market with something unexpected. An envelope addressed to Ngozi, but with no name or stamp. Inside was a short letter, written in neat handwriting. "There's still beauty in your ashes. You are not forgotten." Isaiah 43 verse 2. No sender. No explanation. Ngozi's hands trembled as she read it. The verse echoed what she had read in the hospital. She kept reading it over and over, then folded the letter and placed it inside the Bible the stranger had left. She didn't know who was behind it, but the words made her feel seen. Chinyu convinced her to come to the market one morning. It was bustling and noisy, and for a while, Ngozi felt dizzy being around so many people. But something surprised her. Smells, voices, movement. All of it reminded her of life. Not the pain, but the normalcy she had forgotten. A young boy bumped into her and dropped a basket of tomatoes. Without thinking, she knelt to help him. The boy smiled shyly. "Thank you, Auntie." For some reason, his words touched her. She felt something grow in her heart that she hadn't felt in months. Compassion. That night, Ngozi dreamt of fire, but not destruction. In the dream, she stood in the middle of glowing embers. Her children stood across from her, smiling, dressed in white. "Mummy, it's not your fault," Chuka said. Ife reached out and held her hand. "Live for us." She woke up sobbing. Chinyu rushed in, alarmed, but Ngozi smiled through her tears. "I saw them. I think they're at peace." It was the first time she'd spoken of her children without breaking down. Healing had begun, even if slowly. Inspired by her slow recovery, Mummy Titi invited Ngozi to a widow's support group. First she hesitated, but after attending one session, she saw women like herself, wounded but walking. Some wept, some laughed. All of them shared stories. Ngozi found herself speaking too, telling them about the man who had appeared when she almost ended her life. "He saved me," she whispered. "Maybe he was just a man. Maybe an angel. I don't know. But he reminded me that God hadn't forgotten me." With Chinyu's help, Ngozi started baking again. First just small pastries. Then chin-chin and meat pies for neighbors. Word spread. Orders came. For the first time in over 2 months, Ngozi felt useful. Felt needed. One evening, as she kneaded dough by candlelight, she looked at the photo of her children and smiled. "I will live well. For you. For me. For the one who still sees me in the ashes." And that night, in the quiet of her heart, she felt it again, that voice in the wind. One afternoon, while Ngozi arranged freshly baked pies on a tray outside Chinyu's compound, a young girl approached her, panting from a long run. She handed Ngozi a small note and quickly ran off. Ngozi unfolded the paper. It read, "The one who saw you at your lowest will return. Be ready." Her hands trembled. She looked around but saw no one. The note had no name, but the writing was the same neat style as the last letter. Her heart beat fast, not from fear but anticipation. That evening she told Mummy Titi about it, who smiled knowingly. "Sometimes angels revisit," she said. "Not always with wings, but always with purpose." Ngozi didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching, hoping, wondering what it meant to be ready. As days passed with no further message, Ngozi turned her energy toward a new goal. The local women's group needed someone to teach baking. Mummy Titi suggested Ngozi, and though hesitant, she accepted. At the first session, Ngozi stood in front of 8 women. Some widows, some battered by life, all searching for healing. As her hands moved through flour and dough, her voice gained strength. She told them her story, not with tears this time but with clarity. "We may be broken," she said, "but broken ground is where flowers bloom." The women clapped, some cried. And in that moment, Ngozi felt what purpose looked like. Not loud, not glamorous, just real healing work. On a particularly hot afternoon, Ngozi walked to the church to deliver pastries for a youth event. As she stepped inside, she saw someone sitting in the last pew, alone, head bowed. He looked familiar. She approached slowly. "Excuse me." The man turned. It was him, the same man from the hospital. But something was different. His eyes held peace but also sorrow. "I told you we'd meet again," he said. "Who are you?" she asked, breathless. He smiled gently. "A reminder. Messenger. Nothing more." He stood and handed her another photo, this time of her and the women's group, laughing around a baking table. "You're where you're meant to be." Then he walked out. When she turned to follow him, he was gone. That night, Chinyu sat with Ngozi on the veranda. The crickets hummed, and the air was thick with memory. "There's something I never told you," Chinyu began. The day of the explosion, I was supposed to come help you that evening. I was late. Ngozi listened quietly. I blamed myself. I thought if I had come on time, maybe I could have helped. Ngozi reached over and took her hand. We both carry pain, Chinyu. But you saved me afterward. You gave me shelter when I had none. That's not failure. That's grace. Both women wept softly, side by side, healing the invisible wounds they had carried alone for too long. Weeks passed, and Ngozi's business flourished. She taught more women, took orders from nearby schools, and even helped organize a food drive through the church. One bright morning, she stepped out with a tray of chin-chin for delivery. A little girl waved at her and shouted, "Auntie Ngozi, you're my mummy's teacher." Ngozi smiled wide. That single moment, pure, simple, and true, filled her with joy. Joy not as loud laughter, but as quiet proof she had survived. She had grown. And in the breeze that rustled her dress, she felt it again. One Sunday morning after service, the church buzzed with surprise. Bishop Dangana, the regional overseer, had come unannounced. He had heard whispers about a woman who was transforming lives through baking, prayer, and resilience. That woman was Ngozi. After service, he asked to meet her. Ngozi, trembling, stood before him. The bishop smiled warmly. "Your testimony is stirring hearts. Pain doesn't end stories. It rewrites them." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was an invitation to speak at the upcoming regional women's gathering. "We believe God will use your story to heal many," he said. Ngozi blinked back tears. She had once wanted to disappear. Now she was being asked to speak. As she prepared for the gathering, Ngozi began dreaming of her children again. But this time the dreams were filled with peace. Ife would bring her wildflowers, and Chuka would sit at her feet, listening to her stories. In one dream, they both held her hands and said, "We're proud of you, Mummy." She woke with a deep ache, but also a smile. These dreams were no longer chains, they were wings. She began journaling, documenting not just her grief, but her growth. Every dream, every memory, became a thread in the tapestry of her healing. The women's gathering was held at the church headquarters in Elelenwo. Hundreds of women attended. Ngozi wore a simple dress and carried only her Bible and journal. When she stepped to the pulpit, her knees shook. But the moment she began speaking, a calm settled over her. She shared her journey. Not just the loss, but the encounters, the man with no name, the verses, the dreams, and the healing. Tears fell across the crowd. Some women rose to embrace her. Others knelt in prayer. For the first time, Ngozi understood the weight of her survival. Her pain had purpose. After the gathering, a woman approached her. Madam Ikeen, a director of a local NGO focused on widows and displaced mothers. She offered Ngozi a job, lead a vocational training initiative across 3 communities. "You're not just teaching baking," she said. "You're teaching hope." Ngozi hesitated, but then she remembered the man's words. "You're where you're meant to be." She accepted. With that one yes, new doors opened. She began traveling, speaking, teaching, and healing. One Saturday, Ngozi returned to the spot near the river where she once sat with her husband and children. The bench remained, worn and faded, but still there. She sat alone, watching the current flow. With hands lifted and eyes closed, she whispered a prayer, not one of desperation, but of gratitude. "Thank you for life after loss, for beauty after ashes, for the stranger you sent." And as she prayed, the wind danced across the water. In the soft rustle of the trees, she heard it again, gentle and sure. While facilitating a training session in Bonny Island, Ngozi noticed a familiar presence in the back of the crowd. Her heart skipped. He was there, the man with the kaftan, watching quietly. She blinked and he was gone. After the session, she asked the staff if anyone had seen a tall man with gentle eyes. They hadn't. It left her stirred but not frightened. His presence had become a quiet assurance, like a lantern glowing in the shadows. That night in her small guest room, she opened her Bible to Isaiah 43 again. The passage felt new every time she read it. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." And she whispered, "Thank you for not letting go." During one of the NGO's outreach meetings, Ngozi met Pastor Emeka, a widowed father who ran a small home for orphans. Their conversations began with shared burdens and blossomed into shared dreams. He had read about her story and asked her to speak to the older girls at his shelter. She accepted, and soon, she found herself sitting among children who had lost everything, just like she had. And when she shared her story, one young girl asked, "Will I ever feel joy again?" Ngozi knelt beside her and said, "Joy comes slowly, but when it arrives, it stays." That moment sealed something between her and Pastor Emeka, a bond not born from romance, but from recognition. One afternoon, Chinyu surprised Ngozi with a gift. Her original wedding ring, rescued from the rubble and restored by a jeweler. "I kept it," Chinyu said, "because I knew one day, you'd need a reminder of where you began." Ngozi held it in her palm for a long time. It no longer symbolized loss. It symbolized survival. That evening, she visited her children's grave with a single candle. She whispered stories, read them her journal, and promised to live boldly. She left the ring there, tucked beside their names. "This belongs with you," she said, her heart lightened. Weeks later, during an early morning prayer meeting, an elderly woman approached her. "You've seen him, haven't you?" she asked. "Seen who?" Ngozi replied. "The man who visits in times of despair. Some call him Elijah, others Raphael. But he is sent to remind the broken that heaven hasn't forgotten them." Ngozi stood frozen. "So he was real?" The woman smiled. "As real as your healing. You were chosen to see him because you were chosen to rise." Ngozi didn't need more answers. She finally understood. Some miracles don't need logic. They only need faith. Ngozi's story became part of the community's song. She wasn't just a widow or a survivor. She was a builder, a healer, a light. Her life touched others not by perfection but by presence. On the one-year anniversary of the fire, she gathered the women she had trained and the children she had inspired. They planted trees where her home once stood, each tree bearing a plaque with a name: Ife, Uka, Uche, her husband. She stood back, smiling through tears. The wind rustled the leaves, gentle and warm, and in that sound she heard the words once more.